The smell of gunpowder hung in the air like a funeral shroud. Flames licked at the night sky, consuming the wagon train as screams pierced the darkness. Elizabeth Collins clutched her medical bag, crouching behind an overturned wagon as arrows whistled overhead. The attack had come without warning, swift, merciless, and devastating. Just hours before, she'd been tending to a child's fever, certain that their journey to Fort Bridgewater would conclude without incident. Now, amid the chaos and carnage, her world collapsed around her. A warrior's silhouette appeared against the flames, his face painted for war, eyes reflecting the inferno. Their gazes locked for just a moment, a heartbeat of recognition, of humanity amid barbarity, before he moved toward her with purpose. Beth scrambled backward, her hands finding nothing but dust and desperation. The last thing she remembered was the striking feather in his headdress and the unexpected gentleness of his hands as consciousness slipped away from her like water through desperate fingers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The journey to Shadow Canyon was a blur of blindfolds and hushed Apache voices. When Beth finally opened her eyes, she found herself in a hide tent, wrists bound with leather strips that allowed movement but prevented escape. Outside, she could hear children laughing, women talking, the ordinary sounds of life continuing despite the extraordinary circumstances of her captivity. The Apache village nestled in the embrace of red rock formations that rose like sentinels. Against the azure sky, Beth had heard stories of these people, savages, the soldiers at her father's fort called them, murderers who scalped innocent settlers and vanished into the wilderness. Yet as she watched through the tent opening, she saw mothers cradling infants, elders telling stories to wide-eyed children, young men bringing in game for the communal cooking fires. It looked disturbingly human. Thomas Rivers, known to his people as Eagle Eye, observed the white woman from across the village circle. The raid on the wagon train had not been his idea. It was Wolf Shadow who had convinced the council that the settlers were carrying weapons to Fort Bridgewater, weapons that would eventually be turned against their people. Thomas had gone along to prevent excessive bloodshed, to ensure they took only what they needed. He hadn't expected to find a woman with a healer's bag, her hands stained with medicine, not weapons. She should have been left behind, Thomas said quietly to White Feather, the aging tribal elder who had been like a father to him since his return from the white man's school in the east. She is not a warrior. White Feather's weathered face remained impassive. Wolf Shadow says she is the daughter of the fort commander. She will ensure our safety when the soldiers come looking. Thomas frowned. A hostage. This complicated matters greatly. Relations with the white settlers were already strained to breaking. The treaty that had guaranteed the Apache this territory had been broken 3 times in as many years, each violation pushing them further into the unforgiving desert lands. Now this woman's capture would give the army the excuse they had been waiting for. I will speak with her, Thomas decided, ignoring White Feather's skeptical look. Beth startled when the tent flap opened. The warrior who entered was not what she expected. He wore buckskin leggings and a loose cotton shirt, not the war paint and feathers from the attack. His black hair was pulled back, revealing a face with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. "You are safe here," he said in perfect English, surprising her further. "No one will harm you." Safe? Beth couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Your men killed innocent people last night. And your soldiers killed 3 of our children last month when they burned our winter camp on the Silver Snake River," he replied evenly. "The cycle of vengeance is as old as these mountains." Beth looked away, her cheeks burning. She had treated survivors from that raid, women and children with terrible burns. Her father had explained it as a necessary action against hostiles, who had attacked a stagecoach. Now she wondered which version was true, or if both were. "I am Thomas Rivers. My people call me Eagle Eye. Elizabeth Collins. Most call me Beth." The formality of the introduction seemed absurd under the circumstances, yet somehow grounding. "You are a healer," Thomas observed, nodding toward her bag, which sat in the corner of the tent. "A doctor's assistant. I was traveling to Fort Bridgewater to work with the surgeon there." She hesitated. "My father is the commander, Colonel." "Collins," Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. That is why you are here." "As a hostage," Beth concluded. "As a guest who cannot leave," Thomas corrected, though his expression suggested he found the distinction as hollow as she did. A commotion outside interrupted them, voices raised in alarm. Thomas stepped to the tent opening, his body tensing as he listened. He turned back to Beth, his expression now urgent. "We have children sick with spotted fever, many already burn with it." Beth recognized the description immediately. "Measles. How many?" "7. Showing signs. More will follow." His eyes held hers, a silent question. Beth didn't hesitate. "I need clean water, cloth for cooling, my bag, and whatever herbs you have for fever and cough." For the first time, Thomas smiled slightly. "You would help us?" "I'm a healer," Beth replied simply. "I don't choose who deserves care." For 3 days and nights, Beth worked tirelessly among the Apache children. The measles had spread quickly through the camp, affecting mostly those too young to have encountered the disease before. With each child she treated, she felt the distrustful stares of the mothers transform into cautious acceptance. Thomas remained nearby, translating when necessary, bringing supplies, and occasionally forcing her to rest when exhaustion threatened to overcome her. On the 4th day, as Beth bathed the fevered brow of a young girl named Little Deer, she became aware of another presence in the medicine lodge. A tall warrior stood watching her, his face impassive, but his eyes burning with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Wolf Shadow questions your motives," Thomas explained later as they walked back to her tent. The children were improving, though 2 remained dangerously ill. "I have no motives beyond keeping children alive," Beth replied wearily. "He believes you cast white man's sickness on us, then pretend to cure it to gain our trust." Beth stopped, walking, turning to face Thomas fully. "That's absurd. The disease came with traders or settlers. Your people have no natural immunity to it." "I know this," Thomas said. "I attended school in Pennsylvania for 4 years. I understand your medicine, your ways." He paused. "Wolf Shadow does not. He sees only that more of our people die each year, from bullets, disease, starvation, as we're pushed from our hunting grounds. And he blames all white people," Beth concluded. "Wouldn't you in his place?" Beth had no answer for that. Instead, she asked the question that had been troubling her since the first day. "What happens to me when the children are well?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Wolf Shadow wants to trade you for weapons and the return of our ancestral lands near Eagle's Nest Mesa." "My father won't negotiate with hostage takers," Beth said quietly. "He'll send soldiers." "I know." Thomas looked toward the mountains, his profile sharp against the setting sun. "That is why we must find another way." That night, unable to sleep, Beth sat outside her tent watching the stars. She was no longer bound. There was nowhere to run in this harsh landscape, even if she had wanted to abandon the sick children. The Apache camp was quiet except for the soft murmur of night guards and the distant howl of coyotes. "You should rest," Thomas said, approaching silently. "The children will need you tomorrow." "I keep thinking about my father, what he must be doing now." Beth wrapped her arms around herself against the desert night's chill. "He's not a cruel man, but he follows orders, believes in duty above all." Thomas sat beside her, offering a blanket which she gratefully accepted. I understand duty. It brought me back here after years among your people." "Why did you come back?" Beth asked, genuinely curious. Thomas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Because, despite everything I learned in your schools, despite the comforts of your world, this is where I belong. My people needed someone who understood both worlds, who could help them navigate the changes coming. And have you helped them?" His laugh held no humor. "I convinced them to sign a treaty that has been broken 3 times. I taught them to trust promises that turned to dust." He picked up a handful of sand, letting it slip through his fingers. "Now, Wolf Shadow's way seems increasingly like the only path left. Violence only brings more violence," Beth said softly. "Peace requires both sides to desire it," Thomas countered. They sat in silence, the weight of centuries of conflict heavy between them. Beth found herself studying his profile, the strong jaw, the eyes that seemed to carry both wisdom and sorrow. This man defied everything she had been told about the savage Apache. He was thoughtful, educated, caught between worlds, just as she sometimes felt caught between her duty as a daughter and her calling as a healer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "There may be a way," Beth said suddenly. "If I could get a message to Dr. Morrison at the fort, he's an advocate for peaceful relations with the tribes. He could speak to my father, perhaps arrange a meeting." Thomas considered this. Wolf. Shadow would never allow it. He sees any negotiation as weakness. "Then we don't tell him," Beth replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "You said you want to find another way. This could be it." Thomas studied her face intently. "You would help us, even after being taken from your people. I've seen how your children suffer. I've listened to your stories." Beth met his gaze, steadily. "Perhaps it's time someone tried to break the cycle." Far from Shadow Canyon, Colonel William Collins paced the confines of his office at Fort Bridgewater, his face haggard from sleepless nights. The raid on the wagon train had left 11 dead, including 2 soldiers, but all he could think about was his daughter, taken by the Apache, who had once again violated the treaty by attacking on protected lands. "We've located their camp, sir," Captain James Harrington reported, pointing to a map spread across the desk. Harrington had been courting Beth for months, his intentions clear, though she had shown little enthusiasm for his advances. Now his face showed the strain of personal anguish alongside military determination. "A patrol spotted smoke from their fires in Shadow Canyon. We can have 3 companies ready to move by dawn." "And risk my daughter's life in a frontal assault?" Collins shook his head. "We need more information first. Sir, with all due respect, every day we wait puts Miss Collins in greater danger." Harrington's voice hardened. "These savages have no honor, no humanity." "You forget yourself." "Captain," Collins said sharply, though privately he shared some of the young officer's sentiments. The Apache had been a thorn in the side of settlement for years, resisting relocation, occasionally raiding isolated homesteads. Yet something held him back from giving the order to attack, something beyond concern for Beth. 3 days, he decided. "We'll send scouts to assess their numbers and defenses. If they haven't made contact with demands by then, we'll consider our options." Harrington's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." After the captain left, Collins opened his desk drawer and removed a faded photograph. Beth as a child, sitting on her mother's lap. Sarah Collins had died of fever when Beth was 12, leaving him to raise their headstrong, compassionate daughter alone. He had tried to discourage her interest in medicine, believing it an unsuitable profession for a woman, especially on the frontier. Now he would give anything to have her safely treating the minor ailments of soldiers at his fort. "I'll find you," he whispered to the photograph. Whatever it takes. At Crossroads Station, the small trading post that served as neutral ground, between the settlements and tribal lands, Samuel Wolf Shadow Blackhawk watched Thomas Rivers with growing suspicion. They had come supposedly to trade for supplies, medicine for the children, ammunition for hunting. But Wolf Shadow had noticed the white woman's influence on Thomas growing daily, had seen the way they spoke together, heads bent close, conversations ceasing whenever he approached. "You trust the captive too much," he said in Apache as Thomas examined a bolt of cloth. "She weakens your resolve with her healing tricks." "She saved a little deer's life," Thomas replied calmly, "and Running Brook's son. Would you prefer we buried our children?" Wolf Shadow's expression darkened. "I would prefer you remembered whose side you stand on, brother. The white man's school has clouded your vision." "My vision is clear," Thomas said, meeting the other warrior's gaze. "I see a future where our children die from bullets or disease. I seek a different path." "There is no different path. There is only survival or extinction." Wolf Shadow moved closer, lowering his voice. "The soldiers gather at Fort Bridgewater. Their scouts watch our camp. Soon they will come with their cannons and rifles. When they do, the woman will be our shield." Thomas felt a chill at the warrior's words. Using her as a hostage will only ensure they show no mercy. Then perhaps it is time we showed none either. With that, Wolf Shadow stalked away, leaving Thomas troubled by the darkness he had seen in his childhood friend's eyes. What Thomas didn't see was Wolf Shadow doubling back, following silently as Thomas slipped away from the trading post to meet with a white man in spectacles, Dr. Morrison from the fort, who accepted a folded paper with a solemn nod before hurrying away. That night, as the Apache camp prepared for sleep, Thomas found Beth checking on the recovering children one last time. The measles had run its course, painful, frightening, but ultimately defeated by her knowledge and care. The mothers who had once watched her with suspicion now greeted her with nods of respect, some even learning basic English words to thank her. "We should speak," Thomas said quietly, guiding her away from the central fires toward the edge of camp where cottonwood trees provided privacy. "Your message reached Dr. Morrison. He'll speak to my father," Beth said, hope brightening her eyes in the moonlight. "He believes a meeting could be arranged at Crossroads Station, neutral ground." Thomas nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Wolf Shadow suspects something. He's gathering warriors who think as he does, preparing for battle rather than talk. Beth's hope faltered. "Can you stop him?" "Not alone. Some listen to White Feather, but many of the younger men follow Wolf Shadow. They've lost faith in treaties and promises." Thomas hesitated, then made a decision. "We should leave tonight. I can get you safely to Crossroads Station." From there, a sharp voice cut through the darkness, speaking rapid Apache. Wolf Shadow stepped from the shadows, 3 warriors beside him, their expressions cold. "What is he saying?" Beth whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Thomas straightened, replying, in Apache with dignity and restraint. The exchange grew heated, Wolf Shadow gesturing angrily toward Beth, then toward the direction of the fort. Finally, he spat on the ground and turned away, barking orders to the other warriors. "He's placing me under guard," Thomas explained grimly. "He says I've betrayed our people by conspiring with the enemy. He's moving forward with his plan to use you to force concessions from the fort." "What will he do?" Beth asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "He's sending a message to your father with a portion of your hair, threatening to return you piece by piece unless his demands are met." Thomas's eyes held hers, conveying what he couldn't say aloud with guards watching. "He does not intend to let you leave alive, regardless of what your father does." Beth swallowed hard, understanding the dire implications. "Then we have no choice." Thomas gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Trust me," he whispered. when the moment comes. Far above Shadow Canyon, dark thunderclouds gathered around Thunder Peak, casting the Apache camp into premature twilight. Wolf Shadow's warriors had spent the morning preparing, checking arrows, sharpening knives, painting their faces with the red ochre that signified blood vengeance. The mood in the camp had shifted palpably from caution to aggressive anticipation. Children were kept close to the women, elders gathered in solemn councils, and Thomas Rivers found himself under constant surveillance, his status transformed from respected leader to suspected traitor overnight. Beth had been moved to a smaller tent near Wolf Shadow's dwelling, her medical supplies confiscated, her previous freedom of movement revoked. Through the leather walls, she could hear the warriors chanting war songs, their rhythmic voices rising and falling like the wind before a storm. She tried to focus on what Thomas had said, to trust him when the moment came. But as hours passed with no sign of him, doubt crept in like the shadows lengthening across the canyon floor. When the tent flap finally opened, it was White Feather, who entered, his ancient face as impassive as the stone cliffs that surrounded them. He carried a small wooden bowl filled with water and a cloth. "For washing," he said in halting English. "Night comes." Beth accepted the offering gratefully. "Thank you. Have you seen Thomas? Eagle Eye?" The old man's eyes revealed nothing. "He prepares, all prepare." "For war?" Beth asked, though. She already knew the answer. White Feather settled himself on the ground, crossing his legs with surprising agility for one so old. "Wolf Shadow sees one path, Eagle Eye sees another. The tribe stands divided, as in the days before my grandfathers. Time." Beth dampened the cloth and pressed it to her face, buying time to consider her response. "What happened then, in your grandfather's time?" A ghost of a smile crossed the elder's weathered face. "You are clever, white healer. You seek stories. That might help." He closed his eyes, as if seeing across the decades. The tribe divided. Those who followed the path of war were destroyed. Those who found another way survived. "And which path do you believe in, White Feather?" The old man opened his eyes, studying her with sudden intensity. "I believe the Thunderbird does not fight the mountain lion. Each has its territory, its purpose." He leaned forward. "Wolf Shadow has sent runners to other bands. By tomorrow, 20 more warriors will arrive. He has taken your hair to send to your father." Beth's hand instinctively went to her head, where a small section of her auburn locks had been roughly cut while she slept. "Your father will bring soldiers," White Feather continued. "Many will die. Apache soldier." His eyes held hers. "Captive." The implication was clear. Whatever happened, Wolf Shadow did not intend for her to return home alive. She would be an inconvenient witness to whatever atrocities he planned. "How can I help prevent this?" Beth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. White Feather reached into his robe and removed something wrapped in soft leather. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed an intricate pipe carved from red stone, its stem decorated with beadwork and a single eagle feather. "The peace pipe," he explained, "made by my father's father. It has not been smoked in many seasons." He rewrapped it and pressed it into her hands. "Keep this hidden. When the moon rises, watch for thunder." Before she could ask what he meant, White Feather rose and left the tent as silently as he had come, leaving Beth clutching the sacred object and wondering what role she was expected to play in the unfolding drama. At Fort Bridgewater, the atmosphere was equally tense. Colonel Collins stared at the lock of his daughter's hair that had arrived tied to an arrow, accompanied by a crude drawing depicting what would happen if his forces approached the Apache camp. The messenger, a half-Mexican trader from Crossroads Station who worked with both sides, had delivered Wolf Shadow's terms. 20 rifles with ammunition, the return of the sacred lands around Eagle's Nest Mesa, and free passage for Apache. Hunting parties through settler territory. "It's an outrage," Captain Harrington declared, pacing Collins' office like a caged predator. "They demand concessions while threatening a woman's life. We cannot negotiate with savages." Dr. Morrison, sitting quietly in the corner until now, cleared his throat. "If I may, Colonel, there may be another approach." Collins looked up sharply. "What do you mean, Doctor?" Morrison adjusted his spectacles nervously. "I have information suggesting that not all the Apache support this action. There are moderates among them, led by a man called Thomas Rivers, or Eagle Eye. He was educated in the East, speaks perfect English, understands our ways." "And how exactly did you come by this information?" Harrington demanded, suspicion evident in his tone. Morrison hesitated, then produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "This was delivered to me at Crossroads Station 3 days ago. It's from your daughter." Collins snatched the paper, recognizing Beth's handwriting immediately. As he read, his expression changed from suspicion to surprise to thoughtful consideration. "She says she's being treated well, that she's been caring for children sick with measles," he summarized. "She believes this Thomas Rivers wants peace, but faces opposition from more militant factions. She suggests a meeting at Crossroads Station, representatives from both sides, neutral ground. It's obviously written under duress," Harrington insisted, "or it's a forgery altogether." "It contains details only Beth would know," Collins replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "References to her mother, to conversations we had before she left." Even if it's genuine, sir, meeting with hostage-takers sets a dangerous precedent," Harrington argued. "We have 3 companies ready. Our scouts report the Apache camp is vulnerable from the eastern approach. We could be in position by dawn, free Miss Collins, and deliver a decisive blow to the hostiles." Collins reread his daughter's letter, noting her specific mention of Thomas Rivers. There was something in how she described him. Educated, caught between worlds, seeking a better path, that resonated with the colonel. In his 20 years on the frontier, Collins had seen enough bloodshed to last several lifetimes. Each campaign against hostile tribes seemed to sow the seeds for the next uprising, the next wave of violence. "Dr. Morrison," he said finally, "if I were to consider this meeting, how would we arrange it?" Harrington's face reddened. "Colonel, you can't seriously—" "I'm considering all options, Captain," Collins cut him off sharply. "My daughter's life hangs in the balance." "I could return to Crossroads Station," Morrison offered. "The trader who brought the message. Manuel. Ortiz has connections with both sides. He could carry word to Rivers." Collins made his decision. "We'll try this approach first. Morrison, you'll go with Lieutenant Parker to Crossroads Station at first light. Arrange a meeting for tomorrow at noon." He turned to Harrington. "Meanwhile, Captain, you'll continue preparations for a military operation. If diplomacy fails, we move immediately." "And if it's a trap, sir?" Harrington asked stiffly. Collins's expression hardened. "Then God help them all." As night fell over Shadow Canyon, Beth found herself alone in her tent, the peace pipe hidden beneath her skirts, waiting for whatever signal Whitefeather had cryptically mentioned. Outside, she could hear the camp preparing for nightfall. Cooking fires being banked, children being called to their family dwellings, guards taking up positions around the perimeter. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the canyon, followed by the first pattering of raindrops on the tent hide. The storm that had threatened all day had finally arrived, bringing with it winds that bent the tops of the pines and sent loose items tumbling through the camp. The tent flap whipped open suddenly, admitting a gust of wind and rain along with Thomas Rivers. He moved quickly to her side, speaking in urgent whispers. "The storm is our chance. Wolf Shadow and his closest warriors are meeting in the council lodge. The guards are seeking shelter. He held out a bundle of rough cloth. "Put this on. Keep your head down." Beth didn't hesitate, pulling the scratchy Apache blanket around her shoulders. "White feather gave me something," she whispered, retrieving the peace pipe from its hiding place. Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "The old peace pipe. I haven't seen it since I was a boy." He took it reverently. White feather has chosen sides at last. This might turn the tide with some of the elders. A particularly violent gust of wind shook the tent, nearly collapsing one side. Thomas secured the loose stake, then peered outside. "Now, move quickly, but don't run. Head for the horse corral." Heart pounding, Beth followed Thomas into the storm. Rain lashed at her face, plastering her hair to her forehead and soaking the blanket within seconds. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the camp. Dwellings battened down against the weather, cooking fires extinguished, only a few huddled figures hurrying for shelter. No one paid attention to two more hunched shapes moving through the downpour. At the corral, Thomas quickly caught his horse, a magnificent pinto stallion that seemed unnaturally calm despite the storm. He secured their few provisions to the back of the saddle, then helped Beth mount before swinging up behind her. "Thunder knows these canyons even in darkness," he said close to her ear, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. "Hold tight." The horse moved out at a steady trot, staying close to the canyon wall where overhanging rock provided some shelter from the worst of the rain. They had just passed the last dwelling when a shout rose behind them, barely audible over the storm. "They've discovered you're missing," Thomas said grimly, urging Thunder into a gallop. "We need to reach the high pass before they can organize pursuit." The path narrowed as they climbed, switchbacking up the steep canyon wall. Lightning revealed glimpses of the drop to their right, a sheer fall that ended in jagged rocks hundreds of feet below. Beth clung to the saddle horn, trying to ignore the danger as Thunder picked his way confidently along the treacherous trail. Behind them, more shouts echoed up the canyon, followed by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Wolf Shadow had wasted no time in organizing pursuit, and unlike Thomas and Beth, his warriors would not be burdened by riding double. "They're gaining," Beth said, risking a glance over her shoulder. "Almost to the pass," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the urgency of their situation. "Once we're through, the trail divides. They'll have to split up to follow." The path leveled out briefly as they reached the top of the ridge. Here, wind-gnarled pines clung tenaciously to the rocky soil, their branches thrashing in the gale. Thunder paused, sides heaving as Thomas oriented himself. "Crossroads Station is a half-day's ride southeast," he said, "but they'll expect that. We should head west first, use the storm to mask our trail, then circle back." A bolt of lightning struck uncomfortably close, the thunderclap that followed so loud it made Thunder sidestep nervously. In that flash of brilliant light, Beth saw what Thomas had already noticed, the silhouette of a rider blocking the path ahead. "Wolf Shadow," Thomas murmured, his body tensing against her back. The Apache warrior sat motionless on his horse, a rifle resting across his lap, his face expressionless despite the rain streaming down it. Something about his stillness, his certainty, sent a chill through Beth that had nothing to do with her soaked clothing. "You betray your people for a white woman," Wolf Shadow said in Apache, his voice carrying despite the storm. "I try to save our people from destruction," Thomas replied in the same language. "This path of war leads only to death." "Better to die standing than live on our knees," Wolf Shadow spat. "You have become weak, brother. The white man's school took your warrior heart and gave you a woman's fear." Beth felt Thomas stiffen at the insult, but his voice remained controlled. "Step aside. There is a chance for peace if we can reach Crossroads Station." Wolf Shadow's laugh was as cold as the rain that pelted them. "Peace, while they take our lands, kill our game, poison our water?" "No." He raised the rifle. "I will return the woman to camp, or her body. You may come back and face the council's judgment, or die here as a traitor. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Beth could feel Thomas calculating their options. Thunder was tired from carrying double, the path was treacherous in the storm, and Wolf Shadow had the advantage of position and weaponry. "The woman saved our children," Thomas said finally. "Does that count for nothing?" Something flickered in Wolf Shadow's eyes, doubt perhaps, or memory of the sick children Beth had tended. In that moment of hesitation, Thomas acted. He whispered a command to Thunder, who reared suddenly, then charged directly at Wolf Shadow's mount. The warrior fired, but the shot went wide as his horse shied away from the oncoming threat. Thunder shouldered past the other animal, nearly unseating Wolf Shadow as they thundered by. Beth caught a glimpse of the warrior's face, shock giving way to fury, before they were past him and plunging down the western slope of the ridge. "He'll follow," Thomas said grimly, allowing Thunder to find his own footing on the treacherous descent, "and he won't miss a second time." The trail descended in a series of switchbacks, each turn bringing them lower into a dense forest of pine and spruce. The rain had lessened slightly, but the ground was saturated, making the path slippery and treacherous. Twice, Thunder nearly lost his footing, recovering at the last moment. Behind them, they could hear Wolf Shadow in pursuit, closing the distance on the downhill stretches where his lighter burden gave him the advantage. Thomas pushed Thunder as hard as he dared, knowing that a fall at this speed could be fatal for all of them. As they reached the bottom of the slope, the forest opened into a small meadow bisected by a stream, normally placid, but now swollen with rainwater into a churning torrent. Thomas reined in briefly, scanning for the best crossing point. There, Beth pointed to a section where the water seemed slightly less turbulent, large rocks breaking the surface. Thomas nodded, guiding Thunder toward the spot. The stallion stepped carefully into the rushing water, testing each placement before committing his weight. They were halfway across when Wolf Shadow emerged from the trees behind them, his rifle raised. "Down!" Thomas shouted, pulling Beth low against Thunder's neck as a shot cracked through the air. The bullet whined past, spanking into the water. Beside them, Thunder lunged for the far bank, powerful legs finding purchase on the slippery stones. As they scrambled up the muddy embankment, Beth risked a glance back. Wolf Shadow was urging his horse into the stream, determination etched on his face. The forest on this side was different. Younger trees spaced more widely, with less undergrowth to slow their progress. Thunder found his stride, galloping parallel to the stream for several hundred yards, before Thomas guided him deeper into the trees. "The crossing will slow him down," Thomas said, finally allowing Thunder to slow to a trot. "We need to find shelter, rest the horse." As if in answer, the trees ahead thinned, revealing a massive rock formation rising from the forest floor. At its base, Beth could make out a dark opening, a cave or overhang that might offer protection from both the elements and their pursuit. Thomas approached cautiously, dismounting to examine the entrance before helping Beth down. It's dry inside, no signs of bear or mountain lion. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, a shallow cave extending perhaps 30 feet into the hillside. Thomas led Thunder inside, then set about creating a small, smokeless fire from materials in his saddlebag. "Won't the light be seen?" Beth asked, huddling near the tiny flame. "The entrance faces away from our trail," Thomas explained. "Unless Wolf Shadow rides directly past, he won't spot it." As warmth gradually returned to her limbs, Beth studied Thomas in the firelight. He moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to survival situations, his actions deliberate and economical. Yet there was something troubled in his expression, a weight beyond their immediate danger. "You could have stayed," she said quietly, "explained to your council. They might have listened to you over Wolf Shadow." Thomas shook his head. "Wolf Shadow has been planning this for months. The raid, On your wagon train was just the beginning. He sat back on his heels, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face. He's convinced that total war is the only answer, that if enough settlers and soldiers die, the rest will abandon this territory. That's madness, Beth whispered. The army would send more troops, not fewer. I know. But Wolf Shadow sees only the immediate victory, not the long defeat that would follow. Thomas sighed, feeding another small twig to the fire. My people stand at a crossroads. One path leads to war and eventual destruction. The other, surrender, Beth suggested gently. Adaptation, Thomas corrected. Finding a way to preserve what matters most, our culture, our beliefs, our connection to this land, while accepting that the world is changing around us. He met her eyes across the flames. It's why I returned from the East. I thought I could help bridge that gap, show my people how to walk between worlds as I have learned to do. Beth recognized the burden he carried, the weight of trying to save a people who might not want to be saved in the way he offered. She had seen something similar in her father's eyes when he spoke of civilizing the frontier, bringing law and progress to wild lands. Both men believed they knew the best path forward, yet both struggled against forces greater than themselves. My father isn't unreasonable, she said, offering what comfort she could. If we can reach Crossroads Station, arrange a meeting. Even if your father listens, there are others who won't, Thomas replied. Indian agents who see us as obstacles to be removed, settlers who want our hunting grounds for cattle, railroad men who need our passes for their tracks. He retrieved Whitefeather's peace pipe from his saddlebag, running his fingers over the intricate carvings. This was used to make peace between our band and the Navajo 3 generations ago. Both sides kept that peace, but agreements with white men seemed written in sand, not stone. Outside, the storm was passing, the rain, reduced to a gentle patter against the stone. In the distance, an owl called, its mournful cry echoing through the forest. We should rest, Thomas said, setting the pipe carefully aside. A few hours of sleep, then we ride before dawn. Wolf Shadow will expect us to head for Crossroads Station, so we'll circle north, approach from an unexpected direction. Beth nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline of their escape had sustained her, but now her body demanded rest. She settled onto the blanket Thomas offered, using her saddle for a pillow. What made you help me? She asked. As Thomas banked the fire, you risked everything. In the dim light, she saw him smile, a rare expression that transformed his serious face. You risked everything too. For our children, some debts must be repaid. But there was something more in his eyes, something he left unspoken as he turned. A way to check on Thunder one last time. Beth watched him, this man caught between worlds, and wondered if perhaps they were not so different after all. Both seeking a path through dangerous terrain, both hoping for a future where the chasms between their peoples might somehow be bridged. With that thought warming her more than the dying fire, Beth closed her eyes and surrendered to exhaustion. Beth woke to Thomas's hand, gently shaking her shoulder. Outside the cave, the world remained dark, though a faint lightning along the eastern horizon hinted at approaching dawn. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a profound stillness, broken only by occasional water droplets falling from saturated branches. We should move, Thomas whispered, already packing their meager supplies. Wolf Shadow knows these forests as well as I do. He'll resume the search at first light. Thunder stood ready, seemingly refreshed by the few hours of rest. The Pinto's ears flickered attentively as Thomas secured their belongings and helped Beth mount. Before joining her, Thomas spent several minutes erasing all signs of their presence, scattering the ashes of their small fire, brushing away footprints near the entrance, laying false tracks leading in the wrong direction. Wolf Shadow was trained as a tracker from childhood, he explained, swinging up behind Beth. He can read sign most men would miss entirely. They set off through the pre-dawn forest, moving at a steady walk to minimize noise. The air felt clean and new after the storm, carrying the scent of wet pine and sage. Under different circumstances, Beth might have found the ride beautiful. The last stars fading overhead, mist rising from the valley below, the occasional startled deer bounding away from their path. Instead, her eyes constantly scanned the shadows, expecting Wolf Shadow's vengeful figure to materialize at any moment. "If we maintain this pace, we can reach Crossroads Station by midday," Thomas said, his voice low near her ear. "The trader there, Manuel Ortiz, is neutral territory. Neither Apache nor white, he has managed to survive by being useful to both sides." "Can he be trusted?" Beth asked, thinking of the delicate negotiations they hoped to arrange. She felt Thomas shrug slightly behind her. "Ortiz follows one loyalty above all others, silver. But he's smart enough to know that ongoing conflict damages his business. He'll help broker a meeting if he sees profit in peace." As the sun cleared the eastern mountains, they emerged from the forest onto a high ridge that offered a commanding view of the valley below. Thomas reined in, allowing Beth to take in the landscape. In the distance, perhaps 10 miles away, she could make out a cluster of buildings nestled in a grove of cottonwoods where several trails converged. Crossroads Station. Beyond it, the terrain flattened into the scrubland that eventually led to Fort Bridgewater. "Look there," Thomas pointed to the southwest, where a thin column of smoke rose from behind a far ridge. "That's our camp. Wolf Shadow will have warriors, searching every trail by now." Beth studied the vast expanse of territory that separated them from safety. "What's the safest route?" Thomas considered before answering. "The direct path follows the valley floor, faster but exposed. There's a longer route through those foothills." He indicated a series of rolling hills to the east, slower but with better cover. "Which would Wolf Shadow expect us to take?" A grim smile touched Thomas's lips. "He knows I favor caution. He'll have men watching the foothills." "Then we take the valley," Beth said decisively. Thomas nodded. "A bold choice. It might work, precisely because it seems reckless." He urged Thunder forward, beginning the descent toward the valley floor. "Stay alert. We'll be visible to anyone watching the high ground." They made good time across the open valley, Thunder moving at a ground-eating trot that ate up the miles without exhausting the horse. The morning warmed around them, the sun burning away the last wisps of mist and drying the rain-soaked earth. By mid-morning, Crossroads Station had grown from a distant speck to a clearly visible settlement, its weathered buildings beckoning with the promise of safety. "Something's wrong," Thomas said suddenly, pulling Thunder to a halt. He stood in the stirrups, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" Beth asked, trying to see what had alarmed him. No smoke from chimneys, no movement around. The buildings. Thomas settled back into the saddle, his body tense against hers. "Ortiz always has customers, traders, trappers, the occasional prospector. The station is never completely still." Beth felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Could Wolf Shadow have reached it before us? Possibly, though he would have had to ride through the night. Thomas guided Thunder off the trail into a stand of mesquite that offered some concealment. Or your father's soldiers might have arrived early for the meeting. Either way, we're riding into potential danger, Beth concluded. Thomas nodded. Grimly, "I'll approach alone first. If there's trouble, Thunder can outrun any pursuit with just one rider." He began to dismount, but Beth caught his arm. "No, we've come this far together." She met his surprised look with determination. "Besides, I'm the Colonel's daughter. If there are soldiers there, my presence might prevent bloodshed." After a moment's hesitation, Thomas nodded. "We'll approach together, but cautiously." If I give the signal, be ready to take the reins and ride hard for Fort Bridgewater." They emerged from the mesquite and continued toward Crossroads Station at a walk, making no attempt at concealment now. As they drew closer, the unnatural stillness of the place became even more apparent. No horses stood at the hitching posts, no smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, no voices or movement disturbed the eerie quiet. 50 yards from the main building, Thomas reined in again. "Look at the ground," he said quietly. Beth saw what had caught his attention: multiple hoofprints and boot marks churning the earth around the station, some made recently enough that the morning sun hadn't yet dried them completely. "Many riders," Thomas observed. "Some Apache ponies, judging by the smaller prints, but most are shod like cavalry mounts." A flicker of movement at one of the station windows caught Beth's eye. "Someone's watching us," she whispered. Thomas had seen it too. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his empty hands shoulder high. "I am Thomas Rivers," he called in clear English. "I seek Manuel Ortiz for peaceful talk. With me is Elizabeth Collins, daughter of Colonel Collins from Fort Bridgewater." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the station door opened partway, and a man's voice called out, "Step down from the horse, both of you, hands where I can see them." Thomas complied, helping Beth dismount before raising his hands again. "We come in peace," he repeated, "for talks arranged through Dr. Morrison." The door opened fully, revealing a short, portly Mexican in a stained apron, Manuel Ortiz himself. Behind him stood two figures with rifles, one a white man in civilian clothes, the other an Apache warrior whose painted face marked him as one of Wolf Shadow's followers. "You have bad timing, Rivers," Ortiz said, his accented English clipped with tension. "Or perhaps very good timing, depending on how you look at it." "What's happened here?" Thomas asked, keeping his hands visible as they walked slowly toward the station. Ortiz glanced nervously between Beth and Thomas. "Your Apache friend arrived." 2 hours ago," he nodded toward the warrior, "demanding to know if I had seen you. Then an hour later, this one," he indicated the white man, "arrives from the fort, asking about arrangements for a meeting." "Lieutenant Parker," Beth recognized the young officer who nodded stiffly. "Miss Collins, your father sent me with Dr. Morrison to arrange your safe return." Parker's eyes never left Thomas, his rifle held ready. "Morrison is inside speaking, with the Apache woman." "Apache woman?" Thomas asked sharply, just as Beth said, "My father agreed to the meeting." Ortiz sighed heavily. "Perhaps you should both come inside. The situation is complicated." The interior of the trading post was dimly lit and smelled of tobacco, leather, and the various goods that crowded its shelves. At a rough wooden table in the center of the room sat Dr. Morrison, looking uncomfortable but determined. Across from him was an elderly Apache woman whom Beth recognized immediately. "White Feather's wife," Thomas said, surprise evident in his voice. "Swift Deer." The old woman's face remained impassive, but her eyes held a mixture of relief and worry at the sight of Thomas. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her gnarled hands moving expressively. Thomas listened intently before translating for the others. "Wolf, Shadow has discovered White Feather's role in helping us escape. He has placed the elder under guard, accusing him of betraying the tribe." His expression darkened. "She came to warn us that Wolf Shadow is bringing warriors here, not to talk, but to ambush any soldiers who come for the meeting." Lieutenant Parker shifted nervously. "Colonel Collins is planning to arrive at noon with a small escort, just 6 men, as agreed through Dr. Morrison." 7 men against Wolf Shadow's warriors would be slaughter," Thomas said bluntly. "We need to send warning," Beth insisted, turning to Parker. "How far ahead did you ride?" "Only an hour. The colonel was following with the escort, moving more cautiously." Parker glanced at the Apache warrior, who stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable. If I leave now, I might intercept them before they're too close. And what of us? Thomas asked, gesturing to himself and Beth. If your warning succeeds, the meeting will be cancelled if Wolf Shadow arrives and finds us here. Swift Deer spoke again, her voice urgent. Thomas listened before translating. She says White Feather believes this may be the last chance for peace. If the meeting fails, Wolf Shadow will lead the tribe to war, a war they cannot win. Beth looked at the assembled faces. Parker's youthful anxiety, Morrison's scholarly concern, Ortiz's calculated neutrality, Swift Deer's dignified resolve, and the impassive guard whose loyalty to Wolf Shadow might mean death for them all. Finally, her eyes met Thomas's, seeing in them the same determination she felt rising within herself. The meeting must happen, she declared, but not as an ambush. We need to turn Wolf Shadow's plan against him. For the next hour, the unlikely allies formulated their strategy. Lieutenant Parker would ride back to intercept Colonel Collins, not to cancel the meeting, but to adapt it to the new circumstances. Ortiz, motivated by a generous payment from Dr. Morrison, provided detailed information about the station's layout, including the cellar accessible through a trapdoor behind the bar and the hidden lookout post on the roof. Swift Deer, though, unable to participate directly in the planning due to the language barrier, offered crucial intelligence through Thomas's translations. Wolf Shadow had 15 warriors with him, all armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and stolen rifles. They planned to surround the station and attack when the soldiers were inside, killing everyone except Beth, who would be taken as leverage for further demands. What about him? Thomas nodded toward the Apache guard, who had watched the preparations, with increasing unease. He's heard everything. If he returns to Wolf Shadow... Swift Deer spoke to the young warrior in their language, her tone gentle but firm. A lengthy exchange followed, with Thomas occasionally joining in. Finally, the warrior's posture changed, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he lowered his rifle. Running Fox is White Feather's grandson, Thomas explained to the others. Wolf. Shadow sent him because he believed family loyalty would prevent White Feather from influencing the boy. A smile touched his lips. Wolf Shadow underestimated the respect Running Fox has for his grandfather's wisdom. He'll help us, Beth asked, hardly daring to hope. Thomas nodded. He'll return to Wolf Shadow with false information, that we haven't been seen, but that soldiers are indeed coming for the meeting. It will confirm Wolf Shadow's plan while giving us time to prepare. As Running Fox prepared to leave, Swift Deer approached Beth, taking her hands in her weathered ones. She spoke softly, looking directly into Beth's eyes. She says, "You have a healer's hands and a warrior's heart," Thomas translated. In the old stories, it was often women who made peace between warring men. Beth felt the weight of expectation in the old woman's gaze. Tell her I'll do everything I can to prevent bloodshed. After Running Fox departed, the preparations continued with increased urgency. Ortiz and Morrison moved supplies to create better defensive positions, while Parker cleaned and checked his weapons. Through it all, Beth found herself watching Thomas, the way he alternated between Apache and English with Swift Deer, his careful attention to details others might miss, the natural authority with which he directed their efforts despite being the only Apache man among them. "You've done this before," she observed during a quiet moment, bridged between worlds in a crisis. Thomas paused, in checking the priming on a rifle Ortiz had provided. "My first year back from school, a dispute arose over cattle breaking through to Apache hunting grounds. I helped negotiate a solution before warriors on either side could escalate to bloodshed." His expression darkened. "It's become harder each year. Too many broken promises, too much fear and hatred on both sides. Yet you keep trying," Beth said softly. "What choice is there? My people follow Wolf Shadow's path of resistance, they die. They surrender completely to reservation life, giving up our traditions, our connection to these lands. Something vital dies anyway. He set the rifle aside, meeting her eyes directly. There must be a middle path, though few on either side wish to walk it. Beth thought of her father, a military man bound by orders and duty, yet also a father who had encouraged her interest in medicine despite convention. "My father may surprise you," she said. Behind the uniform, he's a practical man. He's seen enough warfare to prefer peace when possible. Thomas seemed about to reply when Swift Deer called urgently from her position at the window. Outside, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. "Your father," Thomas confirmed after peering through the grimy glass. "I count 8 riders, the Colonel, Parker, and 6 escorts." "And Wolf Shadow?" Beth asked. "No sign yet, but he'll be watching, waiting for the soldiers to enter before." Springing his trap, Thomas turned to Ortiz. "The cellar, is it ready?" The trader nodded. Supplies moved, space cleared. It won't be comfortable, but it will hold everyone if needed. Thomas gathered them all in the center of the room. "Remember the plan. Beth and I will meet the Colonel outside as arranged. Dr. Morrison and Lieutenant Parker will accompany us. Ortiz will appear to welcome everyone as normal. Swift Deer will remain hidden upstairs, watching for Wolf Shadow's signal to attack." "And if shooting starts?" Parker asked, his young face tense with the responsibility. "We get everyone into the cellar and hold position until reinforcements arrive from the fort." Thomas checked the position of the sun through the window. "The second patrol your colonel arranged should arrive within an hour of the first, if they maintain schedule." Beth touched Thomas's arm. "And the peace pipe, when do we use it?" Thomas's expression softened slightly. "If Wolf Shadow gives us the chance, we offer it before blood is shed. If not..." He left the thought unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Once violence began, opportunities for peace would vanish like morning mist under the harsh sun. As Colonel Collins and his small detachment approached the station, Beth felt her heart racing. So much depended on the next few minutes, not just her safety or Thomas's life, but the future of relations between their peoples across the territory. Wars often started from smaller sparks than this. "Ready?" Thomas asked quietly as they prepared to step outside. Beth took a deep breath, straightening her still damp dress as best she could. "Ready." They emerged from the trading post side. By side, Dr. Morrison and Lieutenant Parker flanking them, Ortiz standing nervously in the doorway behind. The cavalry detachment halted 30 yards out, dust settling around the horses' hooves in the midday stillness. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Colonel Collins urged his mount forward, separating from his men. Even at a distance, Beth could read the mixture of emotions on her father's face. Relief at seeing her alive, wariness at the situation, the habitual authority of command. "Beth?" he called, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground. "I'm unharmed, Father," she replied steadily. Collins's gaze shifted to Thomas, his expression hardening. "And you must be Rivers." Thomas nodded, deliberately keeping his hands visible at his sides. "I am. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Colonel." "I haven't agreed to anything yet except retrieving my daughter," Collins replied coldly. "Lieutenant Parker says you claim Wolf Shadow plans an ambush. Where is your proof?" Before Thomas could answer, Swift Deer's warning cry came from the lookout post, a single sharp call that needed no translation. Along the ridgeline north of the station, mounted figures had appeared, silhouetted against the sky. Even at this distance, their intentions were clear from their war paint and readied weapons. "There's your proof, Colonel," Thomas said grimly. "Wolf Shadow comes, not to talk, but to kill." Collins barked orders to his men, who immediately formed a defensive position, rifles ready. "Inside, all of you. he commanded, dismounting and drawing his sidearm. "We'll hold them off until—" "No!" Beth moved toward her father, placing herself between the soldiers and Thomas. "That's exactly what Wolf Shadow wants, to force a fight where everyone dies." She gestured toward the trading post. "We have a plan, Father. Please, trust me." For a crucial moment, Collins hesitated, torn between military training and faith in his daughter. Behind him, his men waited tensely for orders. On the ridge, Wolf Shadow's warriors had begun to descend, spreading out to surround the station. "What plan?" Collins demanded. It was Thomas who answered, stepping forward despite the rifles trained in his direction. "The station has a secure cellar. Your men, positioned inside, can hold it against 20 times their number. A second patrol is due from your fort within the hour, enough to turn the tide against Wolf Shadow." "And why should I trust the word of an Apache?" Collins asked, though Beth could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. "Because I rode with your daughter when I could have left her behind," Thomas replied simply. "Because I seek the same thing you do, Colonel, a future where our peoples aren't reduced to counting coups and casualties." The warriors were halfway down the slope now, moving with the practiced precision of hunters closing on prey. Time was running out. Beth took her father's arm. "Please, Father, inside. I'll explain everything." After one more glance at the approaching threat, Collins nodded sharply. "Parker, get the men inside, defensive positions. Move!" The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos as soldiers dismounted and hurried into the trading post, leading their horses around back to the small corral. Thomas directed them to pre-arranged positions, covering the windows and doors, while Ortiz nervously showed Collins the cellar entrance. "It's our fallback if they breach the main floor," Thomas explained. "Defensible with minimal forces, and the second patrol knows to look for signals from the root cellar ventilation shaft." Collins studied the Apache with grudging respect. "You've thought this through like a military man." "I've studied your tactics as carefully as you've studied ours," Thomas replied. "Knowledge is survival when you're caught between worlds." Through the windows, they could see Wolf Shadow's warriors taking positions around the station, some dismounting to approach on foot, others remaining mounted for mobility. They had the building surrounded, cutting off any possibility of escape. "Wolf Shadow will expect me to negotiate," Thomas said, checking the warrior positions with a practiced eye. "He believes I've lost my nerve for direct confrontation. We can use that." "To what end?" Collins asked. "Even if we hold until reinforcements arrive, this ends in bloodshed." Thomas reached into his shirt and withdrew Whitefeather's peace pipe. "Not necessarily. There's another path, if we're brave enough to walk it." A tense silence fell over the trading post as Wolf Shadow's warriors completed their encirclement. Inside, Colonel Collins stationed his men at strategic points, two covering the front entrance, one at each side window, the others guarding the rear approach. Beth found herself beside her father near the bar, watching as Thomas conferred quietly, with swift deer in their native tongue. "Tell me honestly," Collins said in a low voice, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "Were you truly a captive, or did you go willingly with him?" The question caught Beth off guard. "I was taken against my will from the wagon train," she replied carefully. "But once I saw the measles spreading through their children, I chose to stay and help." She met her father's skeptical gaze. "Thomas protected me, Father. Without him, I wouldn't be alive now." Collins studied his daughter's face, noting the earnestness in her eyes. "You've always had more compassion than sense," he said, though his tone held more pride than criticism. "Your mother was the same way." Before Beth could respond, a call came from outside, a single voice speaking in Apache, the words incomprehensible to most inside, but clearly recognizable to Thomas and Swift Deer. "Wolf Shadow demands that you "Send out the white woman and surrender yourself for tribal judgment," Thomas translated for Collins. "He promises safe passage for the soldiers if they leave immediately, abandoning their weapons." Collins's expression hardened. A lie, obviously. "They'd cut my men down the moment they stepped outside unarmed." Thomas nodded grimly. "Wolf Shadow has crossed the line where truth matters. He believes only in victory now, at any cost." "So we wait for reinforcements," Collins concluded, checking his pocket watch. "The second patrol should arrive within 40 minutes if they maintain schedule." "If we wait, blood will flow on both sides," Thomas replied. "There's another way." He held up the peace pipe. "I need to speak with Wolf Shadow directly. Remind him of our traditions, our true ways." "Ah, absolutely not," Collins said immediately. "He'd kill you on sight." "Not with proper ceremony," Thomas insisted. "Even Wolf Shadow would hesitate to violate the sacred protection of the peace pipe. It's been in our tribe for generations." Swift Deer spoke urgently, adding her voice to Thomas's argument. Though Collins couldn't understand her words, the intensity of her conviction was clear. "What's she saying?" he asked Beth. "She says Wolf Shadow still respects the old ways, even as he fights against the new," Beth translated, remembering Thomas's earlier lessons in basic Apache phrases. If Thomas approaches properly, under the pipe's protection, tribal law gives him the right to be heard before the warriors. Collins looked unconvinced. "And if he ignores tribal law, then he loses standing with the elders and many warriors," Thomas explained. "His power comes from claiming to defend our traditions against white encroachment. Breaking our most sacred laws would undermine everything he claims to fight for." A second call came from outside, more impatient than the first. Wolf Shadow was running out of patience. "There's no time for debate," Thomas said, moving toward the door. "I must try." Beth stepped forward, catching his arm. "Not alone. I'm coming with you." "Beth, no!" Collins protested, reaching for his daughter. She turned to her father, her expression resolute. "This concerns both our peoples, father. A woman who has cared for their children stands a better chance of being heard." She gestured toward the peace pipe in Thomas's hand. "Swift Deer says that in the old traditions, it was often women who carried the pipe between warring parties." Thomas looked at Beth with surprise and newfound respect. "She's right, Colonel. In our oldest stories, when men's pride drove them to war, it was women who restored peace." Collins looked from his daughter to the Apache leader, then to his men positioned for battle around the room. After a moment of internal struggle, his military bearing softened slightly. "What exactly do you propose?" Thomas outlined his plan. Quickly. He and Beth would exit under the protection of the peace pipe, requesting formal parley with Wolf Shadow. By Apache tradition, such a request could not be refused without grave dishonor. Once face to face with Wolf Shadow, Thomas would propose terms that might satisfy both sides, enough for Wolf Shadow to claim victory while allowing Collins to fulfill his duty. "It's a desperate gamble," Collins admitted, "but perhaps our only chance to avoid a massacre." He turned to Lieutenant Parker. "If shooting starts, get my daughter back inside at any cost. That's an order." "Yes, sir," Parker replied, his young face solemn with responsibility. As Thomas prepared the pipe, filling it with a mixture of tobacco and herbs from a small pouch Swift Deer provided, Beth found herself watching his hands, strong yet gentle, moving with the precision of one performing sacred ritual rather than mere habit. "What will you say to him?" she asked quietly. Thomas's eyes met hers, dark with determination. "That there are two paths before our people, one leading to destruction, one to survival. I will remind him that courage isn't measured only in blood spilled, but in wisdom preserved." "Will he listen?" A shadow crossed Thomas's face. "Once, perhaps, before hatred hardened his heart." He finished preparing the pipe and stood. "But I must try. We both must." Swift Deer approached, speaking softly to Thomas before turning to Beth. With weathered hands, she placed a woven band around Beth's wrist, a simple pattern of red and white beads interspersed with small shells. "A symbol of medicine woman status," Thomas explained. "It marks you as one who heals across boundaries." Colonel Collins embraced his daughter one last time. "Be careful," he whispered. "I didn't raise you to be a hero." Beth smiled despite the tension. "No, you raised me to do what's right, regardless of the cost." With that, she turned to join Thomas at the door. Dr. Morrison offered an encouraging nod, while Ortiz crossed himself quietly. The soldiers remained at their posts, fingers near triggers, eyes alert for any sign of treachery. Thomas lit the pipe with a coal from the trading post's stove, took the first ritual puff, then handed it to Beth. "Hold it upright in your right hand," he instructed. "Walk slightly behind me to my left. Whatever happens, don't run or make sudden movements." Beth nodded, taking the pipe carefully. The sweet, earthy smoke lingered in the air between them, sealing their commitment to the path they had chosen. Lieutenant Parker opened the door slowly, revealing the harsh midday sun and the tense standoff beyond. Thomas stepped out first, Beth following close behind, the pipe held high as both symbol and shield. The door closed behind them with an ominous finality. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The Apache warriors remained in their positions, bows half drawn, rifles ready. Then a figure detached itself from the central group, Wolf Shadow, his face painted for war, a single eagle feather tied into his hair. "Thomas Rivers seeks peaceful counsel with Wolf Shadow," Thomas called in Apache, his voice carrying across the open ground. "Under the protection of the ancestors' pipe, with medicine woman Elizabeth as witness." Wolf Shadow remained motionless for a long moment, his expression unreadable beneath the war paint. Then, deliberately, he dismounted from his pony and walked forward until approximately 20 paces separated them. "You betray your people, then dare invoke our sacred ways," he replied in Apache, his voice cold with contempt. "The pipe cannot protect traitors." Thomas stood his ground. "I seek to save our people, not betray them. The path of war leads only to our destruction." Wolf Shadow's eyes shifted to Beth, narrowing slightly. "And you bring the white soldier's daughter to speak for us? Have you forgotten the blood of our children on her father's hands?" Beth couldn't understand his words, but the hatred in his tone required no translation. She kept her gaze steady, the pipe held firmly in her right hand, as Thomas had instructed. "She saved our children when sickness came," Thomas replied. "She walks between worlds as I do, seeking healing rather than harm." A murmur ran through the watching warriors. Beth realized that many of them must have had children or younger, siblings among those she had treated during the measles outbreak. She straightened her shoulders, letting them see her clearly, not as a captive or an enemy, but as a healer who had stood with them in their time of need. "Pretty words change nothing," Wolf Shadow spat. "The white soldiers have come for her. As I knew they would, now they will die, and the Apache will reclaim what was stolen." Thomas took a step forward, closing the distance between them slightly. "Listen to me, brother. I have seen the white man's world. Their numbers are like stars in the sky. Their weapons grow more powerful each season. If we fight now, some soldiers will die today, yes, but tomorrow they will return tenfold. Let them come!" Wolf Shadow's voice rose passionately. "Better to die as warriors than live as beggars on reservation land." Beth watched the exchange with growing unease. Though she couldn't understand the words, the increasing tension was unmistakable. Wolf Shadow's warriors had begun to edge closer, tightening the circle around the trading post. Thomas noticed too. Switching to English, he spoke quietly to Beth, without turning. "When I extend the pipe to him, step forward with me. Your presence may be our only advantage." Returning to Apache, Thomas played his final card. The colonel offers terms. Hear them before you choose war. Wolf Shadow hesitated, ambition warring with suspicion on his face. What terms? Safe passage for his daughter and men. In return, he will speak to the territorial governor about returning Eagle's Nest Mesa to Apache hands. Thomas paused, letting the offer sink in. He knows it is sacred land with no value to settlers, no farmland, no water for cattle, no minerals worth mining. It was a gamble. Collins had made no such offer, but Thomas knew the colonel was a pragmatic man. Eagle's Nest Mesa was indeed worthless by white standards, its value to the Apache purely spiritual. It might be the one concession the military could justify making. Wolf Shadow's expression wavered for the first time. The Mesa. Returned to us completely? No soldiers? No Indian agents? Sacred land for sacred purposes, Thomas confirmed. The first step toward a larger peace. He held out the still-smoking pipe toward Wolf Shadow. Take the pipe, brother. Choose the path of our ancestors' wisdom over the glory of a final stand. Beth, recognizing her cue, stepped forward with Thomas, keeping the pipe elevated between them. She focused her gaze directly on Wolf Shadow, letting him see the determination in her eyes. Not fear, not hatred, but the steady resolve of one who had made her choice and would not be swayed from it. For a long, breathless moment, Wolf Shadow stood frozen, the traditions of 1,000 years battling against the rage of recent wounds. Around them, warriors and soldiers alike waited in tense silence, the future of two peoples balanced on the edge of a knife. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Wolf Shadow's hand began to rise toward the pipe. But then his gaze shifted beyond Thomas and Beth toward the trading post door, which had opened slightly. Colonel Collins stood framed in the doorway, flanked by Lieutenant Parker with rifle ready, monitoring the negotiation, prepared to intervene if needed. Wolf Shadow's face hardened instantly. His hand dropped to his side, reaching instead for the knife at his belt. "Treachery!" he snarled in Apache. "The White Chief prepares to attack while you distract me with empty words." "No!" Thomas protested, but it was too late. Wolf Shadow had backed away, raising his arm to signal his warriors. Beth, sensing the sudden shift, acted on instinct. Breaking protocol, she stepped forward directly, placing herself between Thomas and Wolf Shadow. Holding the pipe with both hands now, she spoke clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know you understand English," she said, looking directly into Wolf Shadow's surprised eyes. "So hear me plainly. My father is a man of honor. He stands there not to attack, but to protect, just as you stand here to protect your people." Wolf Shadow's signal remained unfinished, his arm half raised as Beth continued with growing confidence. "I've lived among your people. I've treated your children, shared your food, learned your ways. There is good in both our worlds, wisdom in both our traditions." She held the pipe higher. "This pipe has witnessed peace between enemies before. Let it do so again." For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, remarkably, Wolf Shadow lowered his arm. Though suspicion still darkened his features, something else had entered his eyes, a reluctant curiosity, perhaps, or the first fragile seed of doubt in his chosen path. "The white woman speaks boldly," he said in English, surprising everyone. With his fluency, "But words are wind. I have heard promises before." Thomas seized the opening. "Then let us make promises that cannot be broken," he suggested, relief evident in his voice. The sacred pipe, witnessed by both sides, the terms recorded in the white man's writing. Eagle's Nest Mesa returned to the Apache within 1 moon. And what guarantee do we have that this promise will be kept when others were broken? Wolf Shadow demanded, addressing this question directly to the doorway where Collins stood. The colonel stepped forward, moving slowly and deliberately to join Beth and Thomas in the open ground. His action sent a ripple of tension through both Apache warriors and his own men, but he continued with the steady confidence of a man accustomed to command. "I cannot speak for all white men or all soldiers," Collins said when he reached them, his voice carrying clearly across the stillness. "But in this matter, I give my personal word. Eagle's Nest Mesa has no value to the territory except the trouble it brings. I will recommend to the governor that it be returned to Apache control as a gesture of peace." "A gesture," Wolf Shadow repeated skeptically. "While more of our land is stolen each season, more of our hunting grounds fenced for cattle." Collins met the warrior's gaze directly. A beginning, not an ending, the first step on a longer path. The standoff continued for another tense moment. Then Wolf Shadow did something unexpected. He turned away from Collins and Thomas, addressing his warriors in Apache. A heated discussion followed, with opinions clearly divided. Some warriors gestured angrily toward the trading post, others toward Thomas, while a few nodded thoughtfully at whatever Wolf Shadow was proposing. "What's happening?" Beth whispered to Thomas. "He's putting the decision to his warriors," Thomas replied, surprise evident in his tone. "It's an old tradition, rarely used nowadays, letting the men who would shed blood have a voice in whether it should be shed." After several minutes of intense debate, Wolf Shadow turned back to face them. His expression remained hard, but something had shifted in his stance, a slight relaxation of his shoulders, a marginally less aggressive posture. "The warriors have spoken," he announced. "We will accept the return of Eagle's Nest Mesa as a first payment for peace. But," his eyes narrowed, "if your word proves false, no peace pipe will protect you or any white settlement within 100 miles. Relief washed over Beth, so powerful she momentarily felt lightheaded. Thomas maintained his composure, though she could sense his similar emotion through the slight tremor in his voice as he replied, "The pipe has witnessed your wisdom, brother." Collins nodded solemnly. "I'll draft the terms immediately, to be carried to the territorial governor by my fastest rider." Wolf Shadow made a curt gesture, and his warriors began to withdraw, moving back to more distant positions, though not dispersing completely. The immediate threat had passed, but the situation remained delicate. "We'll watch from the ridge," Wolf Shadow informed them, mounting his pony with fluid grace. "When we see your soldiers depart peacefully, taking only the woman and leaving our brother Thomas with us, we will consider the day's business concluded." Beth looked at Thomas in alarm. "You're staying with them?" Thomas nodded calmly. "I must. My place is with my people, especially now when this fragile peace needs nurturing." His eyes held hers with unexpected warmth. "Don't worry. Wolf Shadow may distrust me, but he won't harm me while Whitefeather and the other elders still have influence." Collins frowned. "Is that wise? You've made powerful enemies today." "I've also reminded some warriors that there are alternatives to war," Thomas replied. "That work must continue." He gestured toward the trading post. "Let's draft your terms, Colonel. The sooner this agreement is formalized, the better for all concerned." Inside, the atmosphere had transformed from battle-ready tension to cautious optimism. The soldiers maintained their vigilance, but shoulders had relaxed, fingers moved away from triggers. Dr. Morrison immediately engaged Collins in discussion of the exact wording for the agreement, while Swift Deer embraced Thomas with the quiet dignity of one whose faith had been vindicated. Beth found herself standing slightly apart, watching these interactions with a curious sense of detachment. For days, survival had been her only concern, first as a captive, then as a fugitive, finally as a negotiator between hostile forces. Now, with the immediate crisis resolved, an unexpected emptiness settled in her chest. The thought of returning to Fort Bridgewater, to the proper, constrained life of a colonel's daughter, after everything she had experienced, felt strangely hollow. "You seem troubled," Thomas observed, approaching quietly while the others busied themselves with preparations. "This is victory. Your father is safe, war has been averted, you're free to return home." Beth attempted a smile. "I am grateful. Truly, it's just..." She hesitated, struggling to articulate feelings she barely understood herself. "These past days, despite the danger, I've never felt more useful, more alive. Treating the children, learning your ways, even today's negotiation, I was making a real difference." Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. "While at the fort, you're expected to attend socials and pour tea for officers' wives?" The accuracy of his assessment startled a genuine laugh from her. "Exactly. My medical knowledge tolerated as an eccentric hobby, nothing more." Thomas glanced toward Collins, who was deep in discussion with Morrison. "Your father strikes me as a practical man. Perhaps he might see value in having someone at the fort who understands Apache ways, who could prevent misunderstandings before they escalate to violence." "A translator? A mediator?" Beth considered the possibility, hope kindling within her. "A healer of relations between our peoples," Thomas suggested. "The territory needs more bridges, fewer walls." Before Beth could respond, Collins called Thomas over to verify some detail of Apache terminology for the agreement. As he moved away, Thomas cast one last glance at Beth, a look containing something deeper than mere alliance or friendship, something that stirred an answering warmth within her. The remainder of the afternoon passed in careful diplomacy. The agreement was drafted with Eagle's Nest Mesa to be formally returned to Apache control within 30 days. Lieutenant Parker would carry the document to the territorial governor immediately, bearing Colonel Collins's strongest endorsement. As sunset approached, preparations were made for departure. The soldiers would escort Collins and Beth back to Fort Bridgewater, while Thomas would return to the Apache camp with swift deer. Wolf Shadow and his warriors remained on the distant ridge, watching silently as horses were saddled and supplies packed. In the quiet moment before mounting, Collins found Thomas inspecting the cinch on Thunder's saddle. "You took a significant risk today, Rivers," the colonel observed. "Wolf Shadow might still seek revenge for your interference." Thomas nodded, acknowledging the danger. "Some prices must be paid for walking between worlds. It's a path I chose long ago." Collins studied him thoughtfully. "My daughter seems to think highly of you." "She's an extraordinary woman," Thomas replied carefully. "Brave, compassionate, intelligent. You've raised her well, Colonel." A hint of a smile touched Collins's weathered face. "Her mother's influence, not mine. Sarah never accepted conventional limitations." He glanced toward Beth, who was saying farewell to swift deer nearby. "Beth mentioned your suggestion about serving as some sort of liaison between the fort and your people. It has merit." Thomas looked up in surprise. "You'd consider it?" "The army wastes valuable resources through misunderstanding local customs and concerns," Collins replied pragmatically. "An interpreter with medical knowledge would be an asset, regardless of gender." His expression grew serious. "Though I warn you, it would place her in a precarious position, trusted fully by neither side, suspected by both." "Like me," Thomas said quietly. Collins nodded. "Precisely. Not an easy life. But perhaps a necessary one," Thomas suggested. "If there's to be any future besides endless conflict." Their conversation was interrupted as Beth approached, ready for departure. She had changed into clean clothes provided by Ortiz's wife, a simple riding skirt and blouse that transformed her appearance from bedraggled captive to proper young lady, though her eyes still held the same determination Thomas had come to admire. "It's time," she said, looking between her father and Thomas. "The men are ready." Collins nodded, excusing himself to give final instructions to his soldiers. For a moment, Beth and Thomas stood alone in the fading light, the future stretching before them, uncertain, dangerous, but perhaps holding possibilities neither had imagined before their paths crossed. "Will I see you again?" Beth asked directly, dispensing with propriety. Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Crossroads Station lives up to its name. Many journeys intersect here. He took her hand briefly, his touch warm against her skin. "Until our paths cross again, Elizabeth Collins." Beth felt the weight of unspoken words between them. Things too new, too fragile to acknowledge openly in this moment of farewell. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes conveying what custom forbade her lips from expressing. "Until then, Thomas Rivers." As she mounted her horse and joined her father's detachment, Beth cast one last glance toward the trading post. Thomas stood watching, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. Behind him on the distant ridge, Wolf Shadow and his warriors remained vigilant, a reminder that the peace they had brokered today was but one small victory in a longer struggle. Yet as she turned her horse toward Fort Bridgewater, Beth felt something she had not expected to find in this harsh territory: hope. A fragile bridge had been built between worlds today. Whether it would stand against the storms to come remained to be seen, but she had crossed it once and found unexpected strength on the other side. And somewhere deep within, she knew with certainty that her journey between worlds was not ending. Today, but only beginning. Fort Bridgewater rose from the desert landscape like a defiant statement of permanence. Adobe walls and wooden structures arranged in rigid military precision around a central parade ground. After 3 weeks behind its protective walls, Beth found herself missing the open skies and natural rhythms of the Apache camp with an intensity that surprised her. The fort's constant activity, the bugle calls marking each hour, the drilling. Soldiers, the ceaseless human bustle, felt oppressive after her time in Shadow Canyon. She stood at the window of her father's quarters, watching the dusty road that led toward Crossroads Station. Every day since their return, she had maintained this vigil, though she couldn't have explained exactly what or whom she was watching for. Her father had sent the agreement regarding Eagle's Nest Mesa to the territorial governor, as promised, but no word had returned yet. The official channels of government moved with maddening slowness compared to the direct negotiations of that tense day at the trading post. "Still at the window, Beth?" Dr. Morrison's gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. The elderly physician had become her most regular visitor, encouraging her interest in medicine and listening with genuine curiosity to her accounts of Apache healing practices. "Just getting some air," she replied, turning to greet him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Morrison settled his substantial frame into a chair, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Dreadful heat today. I've treated 3 cases of heat exhaustion among the new recruits. Eastern boys unused. To desert conditions." He studied her face with professional interest. "You're looking pale, not sleeping well." Beth shrugged, unwilling to admit the dreams that had plagued her since returning to the fort. Dreams of Shadow Canyon, of children with fever, of Thomas Rivers standing silhouetted against the sunset. "I'm fine, just restless. Father still won't allow me beyond the fort walls without an escort." "Understandable after your ordeal," Morrison observed diplomatically. "It wasn't an ordeal," Beth corrected, a familiar frustration creeping into her voice. "That's what no one here seems to understand. Yes, I was taken against my will initially, but what followed?" She struggled to find words that wouldn't sound like madness to ears accustomed to viewing the Apache only as savage enemies. "I learned things, Doctor, about their medicines, their ways of understanding illness. They don't separate the body's health from the spirit's as we do." Morrison nodded encouragingly. "Different approaches often contain wisdom our own traditions might lack. That's why I've been speaking with your father about a more formal arrangement. For you." Beth turned sharply from the window. "What arrangement?" "The colonel mentioned your interest in serving as a liaison between the fort and the Apache. I've been supporting the idea in my official capacity." Morrison smiled at her evident surprise. "We desperately need someone who understands both cultures, especially someone with medical knowledge. The reservation agency has requested assistance with several outbreaks among relocated tribes." Hope flared within Beth for the first time in weeks. Father agreed to this. "With conditions," Morrison qualified. "You would work under my supervision officially. All interactions with tribal members would be documented. And," he hesitated slightly, "Captain Harrington would command your escort detail." Beth's enthusiasm dimmed at the last condition. Since her return, James Harrington had resumed his attentions with increased determination, clearly viewing himself as the devoted suitor waiting patiently for his traumatized beloved to recover her senses. His inability to conceive that she might have found value in her time among the Apache irritated Beth profoundly. "I see," she said carefully. "When would this arrangement begin?" "Almost immediately. There's a situation developing that requires delicate handling." Morrison lowered his voice slightly. "Word came yesterday that the territorial governor has approved the agreement regarding Eagle's Nest Mesa. The army has been ordered to withdraw the small observation post established there last year." Beth's heart leapt. "That's wonderful news. The agreement is being honored." "Yes, but with complications. Captain Harrington has been assigned to oversee the withdrawal, and he's not." Morrison searched for a diplomatic phrasing. "Entirely sympathetic to the arrangement. Your father hopes your presence might ensure things proceed smoothly when the Apache arrive to reclaim the site." Beth understood immediately. Harrington's attitude toward the Apache bordered on pathological hatred. Having him oversee this delicate transfer without someone to moderate his approach could undermine everything they had worked for at Crossroads Station. "When do we leave?" she asked, already mentally preparing a list of supplies she would need. "Tomorrow at dawn, a small detachment, just 8 men, you, myself, and the captain." Morrison rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "I suggested bringing Thomas Rivers to assist with the formal handover ceremony, but the captain was adamantly opposed." Beth kept her expression neutral, despite the quickening of her pulse at the mention of Thomas's name. "Has there been any contact with him since our return?" "Not directly. Trading posts report he's been traveling between Apache bands, apparently trying to build support for the peace agreement." Morrison headed toward the door, then paused. "One trader mentioned he specifically inquired about your welfare." After Morrison left, Beth remained at the window, but her gaze had shifted from the empty road to the distant mountains, where Eagle's Nest Mesa rose against the horizon, a flat-topped formation sacred to the Apache for generations. Tomorrow, she would return there, completing the circle that had begun with her capture and continuing the work of building understanding between two worlds. The thought filled her with a nervous energy that was part apprehension, part anticipation. The possibility that Thomas might attend the ceremony as an Apache representative both thrilled and unsettled her. In the safety of Fort Bridgewater, surrounded by the familiar structures of her previous life, she had managed to compartmentalize her feelings about the Apache leader, relegating them to a strange interlude that she could examine at a distance. The prospect of seeing him again threatened that comfortable detachment. That evening, Beth dined with her father in his private quarters, a weekly ritual that had resumed upon her return. Colonel Collins seemed unusually preoccupied, responding to her conversation with distracted monosyllables while picking at his meal. "Is something troubling you, father?" she finally asked directly. Collins set down his fork with a sigh. "Orders arrived today from department headquarters. Once the Eagle's Nest Mesa transfer is complete, I'm to lead 3 companies to the Northern Territories. Apache bands there have been raiding settlements near the mining districts. But those aren't the same Apache, Beth protested. The Northern bands have different leadership, different grievances. To the department, all Apache are interchangeable, Collins replied wearily. Savages to be pacified, regardless of distinctions we in the field might recognize. Beth studied her father with newfound insight. The rigid military man who had raised her with stern discipline was revealing doubts she had never before witnessed, questioning orders, acknowledging complexities his superiors ignored. Perhaps her experience had changed him as profoundly as it had changed her. This campaign could undermine everything we accomplished at Crossroads Station, she observed. If the Northern Apache hear that peace agreements in one region are followed immediately by military action in another, they'll assume bad faith on our part, Collins finished her thought, as they have every right to do. He pushed his plate away, appetite gone. 23 years I've served, Beth, followed orders, fulfilled my duty, believed I was helping bring civilization to wild places. Now I find myself wondering if civilization is worth the price being paid. Beth reached across the table to cover her father's weathered hand with her own. Perhaps that's why this liaison position matters, Father. Small steps toward understanding might eventually influence even department headquarters. Collins managed. A tired smile. Your mother would be proud of your optimism. She always believed individual actions could change the course of history. His expression grew serious again. Be careful at Eagle's Nest tomorrow. Harrington is a good officer, but rigid in his thinking. Don't challenge his authority openly. I'll be diplomatic, Beth promised, though they both recognized the irony of this assurance given her outspoken nature. Dawn found Beth already awake and dressed in her most practical attire, a divided riding skirt that scandalized Fort society but allowed comfortable movement on horseback, a sturdy blouse and a wide-brimmed hat to shield against the merciless sun. She had packed her medical bag with supplies for any contingency, including some of the herbal remedies she had learned from the Apache women. The expedition assembled at the fort gates as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the adobe walls a warm gold. Captain Harrington sat tall and rigid on his chestnut gelding, his uniform impeccable despite the early hour. He acknowledged Beth's arrival with a curt nod, his disapproval of her attire evident in his expression. "Miss Collins," he greeted, stiffly. "I must insist you ride in the center of our formation for maximum protection. The terrain between here and Eagle's Nest is frequently crossed by hostile parties." "As you wish, Captain," Beth replied with carefully measured deference, "though I believe the Apache bands in this region have been peaceful since our agreement." At Crossroads Station, Harrington's jaw tightened visibly. "One negotiation doesn't erase years of treachery, Miss Collins. We'll maintain standard security protocols." He turned to address the assembled soldiers. "Mount up, standard formation, alert posture. We're in contested territory the moment we leave these gates." Dr. Morrison, already mounted on a placid bay mare, caught Beth's eye with a slight shrug of resignation. This journey would require all her diplomatic skills, not with the Apache, but with their military escort. The ride to Eagle's Nest Mesa took most of the day, following a winding trail that skirted the worst of the broken terrain. Despite Harrington's fears, they encountered no one, the landscape stretching empty in all directions, shimmering under the relentless sun. By mid-afternoon, the mesa loomed before them, its flat top and sheer sides creating a natural fortress accessible only by a single winding path. The Army observation post occupied a small plateau halfway up this access path, a crude structure of logs and canvas that seemed insignificant against the ancient grandeur of the surrounding stone. As their party approached, Beth noted the lone flag hanging limply in the still air, and the two soldiers standing guard with the weary posture of men isolated too long in a remote outpost. "Lieutenant Wilson!" Harrington called as they dismounted. "Prepare your men for immediate withdrawal. We'll camp here tonight and depart at first light." The lieutenant, a young man with sun-reddened skin and dust-caked uniform, saluted smartly. "Yes, sir. We've packed all essential supplies as ordered." He hesitated, glancing uncertainly at Beth and Dr. Morrison. "Sir, there may be a complication. We've had visitors." Harrington stiffened. "What visitors, Lieutenant?" "Apache, sir. A small group arrived yesterday, led by an English-speaking Indian who called himself Thomas Rivers. Said they were here for the formal transfer ceremony." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "I told them to return with proper authorization, but they've camped at the base of the mesa. Been there since yesterday, quiet-like." Beth's heart quickened at the mention of Thomas's name, though she kept her expression neutral. Harrington's reaction was less contained, his face darkening with anger as he turned to scan the terrain below. "You should have driven them off. Immediately," he snapped. "This handover occurs on our timetable, not theirs." "Captain," Beth interjected carefully, "their presence suggests good faith. They're obviously eager to see the agreement honored." Harrington fixed her with a cold stare. "Their presence suggests presumption and impatience, Miss Collins, two qualities that have consistently undermined peaceful relations with these people." He turned back to Lieutenant Wilson. "Double the guard tonight. No Apache approaches this post without my direct authorization. Udil." As the soldiers busied themselves with establishing camp and preparing for the withdrawal, Beth found a quiet spot at the edge of the plateau that offered a view of the terrain below. From this vantage point, she could make out a small encampment. Near a stand of juniper trees at the mesa's base, several hide tents arranged in the traditional Apache circular pattern, with a central fire now sending a thin column of smoke into the evening air. "Counting coup before the battle even begins?" She turned to find Dr. Morrison joining her, his medical bag in hand. "I thought I might check on any patients at the outpost while we're here," he explained, setting down his bag with a weary sigh. "The isolation takes a toll on these young men." "I was just," Beth began, then smiled ruefully. "Yes, I suppose I was looking for him." Morrison nodded, understanding. "Captain Harrington has ordered that no messages be exchanged until morning. He's determined to control every aspect of this transfer." The doctor glanced toward the distant Apache camp. "Though I imagine that won't stop Rivers if he's determined to make contact." Beth followed his gaze, torn between hoping Thomas would find a way to bypass Harrington's restrictions and fearing the confrontation that would inevitably result. The captain seems intent on provoking conflict rather than facilitating peace. Harrington lost his brother in an Apache raid 3 years ago," Morrison said quietly. "A civilian surveying party ambushed near the Dragoon Mountains. It wasn't this band, but to him, that distinction means nothing." The revelation gave Beth pause. Harrington's rigidity suddenly appeared in a different light, not mere military inflexibility, but a personal vendetta masquerading as duty. The knowledge didn't excuse his behavior, but made it comprehensible, even pitiable. As darkness fell over the mesa, the temperature dropped dramatically, turning the desert heat to high country chill. Beth wrapped herself in a wool blanket beside the small fire the soldiers had built, listening to their subdued conversations. Most were young men from distant states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Massachusetts, sent to control territories they barely understood for reasons that had seemed clear in Washington, but grew murkier with each mile westward. She had nearly dozed off when a pebble skittered across the ground near her feet. Looking up sharply, she saw nothing but darkness beyond the firelight's reach. The soldiers continued their quiet talk, unaware of anything unusual. Another small stone landed silently on the blanket covering her lap. Carefully, without drawing attention, Beth glanced toward the source of these signals. At the very edge of visibility, where the plateau met the downward path, a shadow moved slightly, a shadow with the distinctive silhouette of an Apache headdress. Heart racing, Beth waited until the soldier's attention was directed elsewhere before slipping. Away from the fire, using the rocky outcroppings as cover, she made her way toward the plateau's edge, all senses alert for the sentry she knew must be posted somewhere nearby. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered when she reached the shadowy figure. "Captain, Harrington has forbidden any contact until morning." Thomas Rivers stepped from the shadows, his face serious in the faint moonlight. "Harrington's restrictions apply to his men, not to you." He glanced toward the campfire. "I needed to warn you. Wolf Shadow has learned of this transfer. He comes with warriors." Alarm coursed through Beth. "To attack? But why? This ceremony fulfills the agreement he accepted. Not to attack, at least not if all proceeds honorably." Thomas's expression remained grave, but he doesn't trust the army to leave without sabotaging the site somehow. He intends to witness every moment of the withdrawal. "Harrington will see his presence as a provocation," Beth said, understanding immediately the dangerous dynamics taking shape. "How many warriors accompany him?" 15. They travel without war paint, but they come armed and suspicious. Thomas moved closer, lowering his voice further. "There's more. Whitefeather believes this site holds special ceremonial significance beyond what we discussed at Crossroads Station. The exact transfer must follow proper ritual, or some elders will consider the agreement void." Beth absorbed this new complication with growing concern. Harrington would balk at any suggestion of ceremonial formality, viewing it as unnecessary pandering to superstition. Yet without it, the fragile peace might collapse before it truly began. "When will Wolf Shadow arrive?" she asked. "By midday, tomorrow. My people below are preparing the ceremonial items now." Thomas hesitated, studying her face in the darkness. "You look well, Elizabeth. The fort agrees with you." "Nay." The personal observation, dropped into their urgent conversation without warning, caught Beth off guard. "I'm restless there," she admitted, "confined in ways that have nothing to do with walls or guards." A hint of a smile touched Thomas's lips. "The space between worlds is uncomfortable territory. Neither side fully trusts those who walk it." "Yet here we both are," Beth replied softly. Their eyes held for a moment, the unspoken connection between them stronger than when they had parted at Crossroads Station. In the weeks since, Beth had questioned her memories, wondering if danger and proximity had created an illusion of understanding between them that couldn't survive in ordinary circumstances. Now seeing him again, those doubts evaporated like morning mist under the desert sun. The moment broke as a soldier's voice called from the campfire. "Miss Collins, are you there?" "You must go," Thomas said urgently. "If they find you speaking with me, Harrington will use it to justify restrictions that will make tomorrow's ceremony impossible." "Tell me what the ceremony requires," Beth insisted. "I'll try to prepare the captain." Quickly, Thomas outlined the ritual elements. A sacred fire, traditional prayers in Apache, the smoking of a pipe to seal the transfer. Specific language acknowledging the ancestral connection to the land. None seemed particularly onerous, but Beth knew Harrington would resist any deviation from standard military protocol. "I'll do what I can," she promised, "but you should know there's a reason for Harrington's hostility. He lost his brother to an Apache raid." Thomas nodded grimly. "Many on both sides have lost family. The question is whether we let those losses define our future." He touched her arm briefly. "Until tomorrow, Elizabeth." Before she could respond, he had melted into the darkness, moving down the path with the silent efficiency she remembered from their escape through Shadow Canyon. Beth stood for a moment, composing herself before returning to the campfire where Dr. Morrison waited with a knowing look, but tactfully refrained from questioning her brief absence. That night, sleep eluded her completely. She lay awake, mind racing with strategies for smoothing tomorrow's potentially volatile encounter. If Wolf Shadow arrived with warriors, Harrington would immediately shift to defensive posture, regardless of their peaceful intentions. If ceremonial elements were introduced without preparation, he would view it as moving the goalposts on an already distasteful arrangement. By dawn, Beth had formulated an approach that might, with considerable luck and delicate handling, prevent disaster. She sought out Dr. Morrison immediately, explaining the situation and enlisting his support for her diplomatic strategy. Wolf Shadow's imminent arrival changes everything, Morrison agreed when she had finished. Harrington must be informed immediately, but carefully. They found the captain overseeing the dismantling of the observation post, directing soldiers. As they loaded equipment onto pack horses, his expression hardened as Beth explained what she had learned, though she carefully omitted the source of her information. Traders passing through mentioned Wolf Shadow's approach, she said instead. They also explained the ceremonial significance of this site to the Apache. It seems certain elements of ritual will be expected during the transfer. This is a military withdrawal, not a religious service, Harrington replied coldly. The terms specified the removal of our observation post, nothing more. The space between worlds is uncomfortable territory. Neither side fully trusts those who walk it. Yet here we both are, Beth replied softly. Their eyes held for a moment, the unspoken connection between them stronger than when they had parted at Crossroads Station. In the weeks since, Beth had questioned her memories, wondering if danger and proximity had created an illusion of understanding between them that couldn't survive in ordinary circumstances. Now, seeing him again, those doubts evaporated like morning mist under the desert sun. The moment broke as a soldier's voice called from the campfire. "Miss Collins, are you there?" "You must go," Thomas said urgently. "If they find you speaking with me, Harrington will use it to justify restrictions that will make tomorrow's ceremony impossible." "Tell me what the ceremony requires," Beth insisted. "I'll try to prepare the captain." Quickly, Thomas outlined the ritual elements: a sacred fire, traditional prayers in Apache, the smoking of a pipe to seal the transfer, specific language acknowledging the ancestral connection to the land. None seemed particularly onerous, but Beth knew Harrington would resist any deviation from standard military protocol. "I'll do what I can," she promised, "but you should know there's a reason for Harrington's hostility. He lost his brother to an Apache raid." Thomas nodded grimly. "Many on both sides have lost family. The question is whether we let those losses define our future." He touched her arm briefly. "Until tomorrow, Elizabeth." Before she could respond, he had melted into the darkness, moving down the path with the silent efficiency she remembered from their escape through Shadow Canyon. Beth stood for a moment, composing herself before returning to the campfire where Dr. Morrison waited with a knowing look, but tactfully refrained from questioning her brief absence. That night, sleep eluded her completely. She lay awake, mind racing with strategies for smoothing tomorrow's potentially volatile encounter. If Wolf Shadow arrived with warriors, Harrington would immediately shift to defensive posture, regardless of their peaceful intentions. If ceremonial elements were introduced without preparation, he would view it as moving the goalposts on an already distasteful arrangement. By dawn, Beth had formulated an approach that might, with considerable luck and delicate handling, prevent disaster. She sought out Dr. Morrison immediately, explaining the situation and enlisting his support for her diplomatic strategy. Wolf Shadow's imminent arrival changes everything, Morrison agreed when she had finished. Harrington must be informed immediately but carefully. They found the captain overseeing the dismantling of the observation post, directing soldiers as they loaded equipment onto pack horses. His expression hardened as Beth explained what she had learned, though she carefully omitted the source of her information. Traders passing through mentioned Wolf Shadow's approach, she said instead. They also explained the ceremonial significance of this site to the Apache. It seems certain elements of ritual will be expected during the transfer. This is a military withdrawal, not a religious service, Harrington replied coldly. The terms specified the removal of our observation post, nothing more. The spirit of the agreement involves returning sacred land, Beth persisted, surely acknowledging that sacredness through minimal ceremonial recognition costs us nothing while building tremendous goodwill. Harrington turned to face her fully, irritation evident in every line of his posture. Miss Collins, your sympathy for these people's superstitions is noted. However, I will not subject my men to pagan rituals or delay our departure for shamanic theatrics. Dr. Morrison interceded with the practiced diplomacy of a man accustomed to navigating military hierarchies. Captain, if I may, Colonel Collins emphasized the importance of this transfer proceeding smoothly. The department has invested considerable political capital in this arrangement as a model for peaceful resolution. If minor concessions regarding ceremony would ensure that success. Harrington's expression wavered slightly at the mention of department interests. Like most career officers, he was acutely sensitive to how his actions might be perceived by superior officers far from the field. What exactly would these ceremonial elements entail? He asked reluctantly. Beth outlined the requirements as Thomas had described them, emphasizing their brevity and symbolic importance while downplaying aspects Harrington might find most objectionable. The entire process shouldn't add more than an hour to our proceedings, she concluded. After further discussion and Morrison's continued diplomatic support, Harrington grudgingly agreed to permit abbreviated ceremonial elements, provided they occurred after the military withdrawal was complete and didn't delay the detachment's departure. It wasn't ideal, but it represented a workable compromise that might prevent outright confrontation when Wolf Shadow arrived. By mid-morning, the observation post had been completely dismantled, its components loaded onto pack horses, its former location marked only by the rectangular outline where the structure had stood. Harrington assembled his men in formation, prepared to conduct a formal military withdrawal with appropriate military dignity. It was at this moment, with preparations nearly complete, that lookouts reported movement on the trail below, multiple riders approaching the mesa from the west. Through her field glasses, Beth confirmed what she already suspected. Wolf Shadow led a column of warriors up the winding path, their expressions solemn, their postures proud, despite the absence of war paint or ceremonial dress. "They're here," she informed Harrington and Morrison, keeping her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her stomach. 15 warriors, including Wolf Shadow, just as the traders reported. Harrington's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm before military discipline reasserted itself. "Formation remains as ordered," he instructed his men. "Weapons ready, but not presented unless I give the command." The Apache delegation ascended the path in single file, emerging onto the plateau with measured dignity. Wolf Shadow led, wearing a simple buckskin shirt adorned with minimal beadwork, rather than full ceremonial attire. Behind him came warriors of varying ages, each carrying a small pouch or bundle that Beth suspected contained ceremonial items. Thomas Rivers appeared last, and Beth felt a jolt of recognition pass through her at the sight of him in full daylight. He had also chosen simple attire, but carried White Feather's peace pipe prominently, a visual reminder of the agreement that had brought them to this moment. The two groups faced each other across the cleared ground where the observation post had stood, decades of mutual suspicion and violence hanging almost visibly in the air between them. For a long moment, no one spoke, each side waiting for the other to establish the tone of this unprecedented encounter. It was Thomas who finally broke the silence, stepping forward to address Harrington directly. "Captain, we come to witness the fulfillment of the agreement made at Crossroads Station. Eagle's Nest Mesa returns today to the keeping of its traditional guardians." Harrington's posture remained rigid, but he responded with formal correctness. "The United States Army recognizes the terms of the agreement and has withdrawn its observation post accordingly. The site is now vacated as promised." Wolfshadow studied the rectangular outline where the structure had stood, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he spoke in Apache, his words flowing with the cadence of formal declaration. Thomas translated, "Wolfshadow acknowledges the withdrawal and asks if the army has left the land as it was found. No buried metal, no poisons in the water, nothing that would desecrate this sacred ground." Harrington bristled visibly at the implied accusation. "The United States Army conducts itself with honor, sir. We have removed all trace of our presence as required by the agreement." An uncomfortable silence followed as Wolfshadow continued to examine the site with obvious suspicion. Beth sensed the delicate moment balancing on a knife's edge, trust barely established, easily shattered by the slightest misstep from either side. "Perhaps," she suggested carefully, "this would be an appropriate moment for the ceremonial aspects we discussed, Captain, a demonstration of mutual respect to mark this historic occasion." Harrington hesitated, clearly torn between his personal antipathy and his professional obligation to conclude this transfer successfully. After a moment of internal struggle, military pragmatism won out. "Very well. We will observe the ceremonial elements as agreed." He turned to his men. "Maintain positions but stand at ease." What followed was a ceremony unlike anything in military protocol. Ancient traditions of the Apache people conducted under the wary eyes of blue-clad soldiers. An elder from Wolfshadow's group kindled a sacred fire using traditional methods, his gnarled hands coaxing flame from materials that looked insignificant but clearly held profound meaning. Prayers were spoken in Apache, the words incomprehensible to most present, but their reverent tone requiring no translation. Throughout, Beth watched the faces around her, Harrington's barely concealed impatience, Morrison's scholarly interest, the young soldier's mixture of curiosity and unease. Most revealing were the Apache warriors, whose initial rigid vigilance gradually softened as they witnessed their sacred rituals performed on land that had been temporarily lost to them. When Thomas presented the peace pipe, even Wolfshadow's stern countenance showed a flicker of something approaching respect. The pipe passed from Apache hands to Harrington, who, to his credit, participated with proper dignity despite his evident discomfort, and then to each significant participant in turn. When it reached Beth, she accepted it with the same reverence she had shown at Crossroads Station, drawing a small breath of the sacred smoke before passing it onward. As she did, her eyes met Thomas's across the circle, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment, recognition of the barriers still standing between their worlds. The ceremony concluded with Wolfshadow speaking formal words of acceptance that Thomas translated with careful precision. "Eagle's Nest Mesa returns to the keeping of the people. The ancestors' bones rest undisturbed. The sacred places remain pure." This agreement has been honored in truth, not merely in words. A palpable release of tension swept through both groups as the ceremonial elements concluded. What had begun as a potentially volatile confrontation had transformed, through careful diplomacy and mutual restraint, into something approaching genuine reconciliation. Harrington, visibly relieved that the proceedings had concluded without incident, issued orders for his men to prepare for immediate departure. As the soldiers mounted up, Beth found herself standing apart, suddenly reluctant to leave this place where something of profound importance had been accomplished. Thomas approached quietly, Wolf Shadow watching from a distance with unreadable eyes. "You've done good work here today," he said simply. Few white women, or men, would have understood the importance of these ceremonies. "Will it make a difference?" Beth asked, glancing toward Wolf Shadow and his warriors. "Will they see this as a true beginning of peace?" Wolf Shadow remains suspicious, as is his nature, Thomas admitted. But the elders who witnessed today's events will carry word to other bands. They'll speak of soldiers who showed respect, of promises kept. Beth nodded, understanding the significance of such witness in a culture where oral tradition carried more weight than written documents. "And you? What will you do now?" A shadow crossed Thomas's face. "There's trouble in the Northern Territories. Apache bands there face different pressures, different threats. I've been asked to travel there, to share what we've accomplished here." Beth felt her heart sink. The Northern Territories were hundreds of miles away, far beyond the reach of her liaison position, beyond any plausible excuse for continued contact. "When do you leave?" "Within days." His eyes held hers, conveying what propriety prevented him from saying directly, "Unless there's reason to remain." The moment hung between them, heavy with possibilities neither dared voice aloud. Beth was acutely aware of Harrington watching from a distance, of Morrison's tactful attempt to appear occupied with his medical bag, of the Apache warriors observing this exchange with inscrutable expressions. "My father received orders yesterday," she said finally, lowering her voice. "He's being sent north with 3 companies to address the disturbances there." Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. "Then our paths may cross again sooner than expected." "I've been appointed liaison between the fort and the Apache," Beth continued, a plan forming even as she spoke. "Dr. Morrison has convinced my father that my medical knowledge could be valuable in addressing health concerns among the relocated tribes. The northern agencies would benefit greatly from such expertise." Thomas agreed, his formal tone belied by the warmth in his eyes. "Especially from someone who understands both Western medicine and traditional healing practices." From across the clearing, Harrington's impatient voice cut through their conversation. "Miss Collins, we depart immediately. Please mount up." Beth glanced toward the captain, noting his rigid posture and barely contained disapproval. Whatever future might be possible between her and Thomas would face opposition from many quarters. Military protocol, social convention, the deep-rooted suspicions on both sides of the cultural divide. "I should go," she said reluctantly. Thomas nodded, his expression composed, yet somehow conveying emotions that transcended the rigid boundaries separating their worlds. "Until our paths cross again, Elizabeth Collins. Until then, Thomas Rivers." As she mounted her horse and joined the departing column, Beth felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. Not just her personal future, but the role she might play in the greater drama unfolding across these contested territories. Behind her, Eagle's Nest Mesa stood as it had for countless generations, witness to this brief moment of harmony snatched from a history of violence. The journey back to Fort Bridgewater passed in contemplative silence. Harrington rode at the head of the column, his ramrod posture gradually relaxing as they put distance between themselves and the Apache delegation. Dr. Morrison rode beside Beth for much of the way, occasionally offering observations about the successful transfer but tactfully avoiding any mention of her private conversation with Thomas. As the fort's adobe walls came into view late that afternoon, Beth found herself viewing them differently than she had that morning. Not as protection from a hostile world, but as barriers separating artificial divisions among peoples who shared the same sun, the same earth, the same fundamental hopes for survival and prosperity. "Your father will be pleased with today's outcome," Morrison remarked as they passed through the gates. The transfer proceeded without incident. The agreement was honored to the letter, and relations with Wolf Shadow's band may have improved markedly. "Yes, though I doubt Captain Harrington shares that assessment," Beth replied, noting how the officer had already ridden ahead to make his report to the colonel. Morrison chuckled softly. "Harrington sees only what his experiences have trained him to see, but perhaps today planted seeds that might eventually change even his perspective." The doctor paused, studying her face with gentle insight. "As for you, my dear, I suspect Eagle's Nest Mesa marked a turning point of a different kind." Beth met his perceptive gaze with quiet determination. "I've found my path, Doctor. It's not one many would understand or approve, but it's mine nonetheless. The most valuable paths rarely follow existing roads," Morrison observed, with surprising poetry from such a practical man. "Whatever course you choose, I believe your mother would be proud, and your father, once he adjusts to the idea." As twilight settled over Fort Bridgewater, Beth stood once again at her window, but her gaze was different now, focused not on waiting for something to arrive from the outer world, but on the horizon that beckoned with possibility. The Northern Campaign would depart within weeks. Preparations would need to be made, arguments marshaled, determination fortified against the inevitable opposition. Yet beneath these practical considerations lay a certainty that had been forming since that moment at Crossroads Station, when she had chosen compassion over fear, a recognition that some journeys, once begun, could not be abandoned halfway. The path between worlds was perilous, lonely, often thankless, but it offered something precious that neither world alone could provide: the possibility of genuine understanding, of bridges built where walls had stood for generations. As darkness fell completely and stars appeared above the desert landscape, Beth made her decision. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever barriers society might erect, she would follow this path to its end, alongside a man who walked the same difficult road, seeking the same elusive peace between divided peoples. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.